Drinking too much alcohol is said to be harmful, but Jason Tyler believes that the third beer he had that night actually saved him. His wife, Alexis, was away on a business trip, so Jason passed the time with some TV and beer, something he rarely did when Alexis was home. That third beer must have filled his bladder because he usually slept through the night without waking. But this time, he woke up needing to use the bathroom. Glancing at the clock on his nightstand, he saw it was 2 in the morning, and one of the neighbor's dogs was barking. It was probably the Klein's dog, since they kept it in an outside kennel. Jason couldn't help but wonder what was the point of having a pet if it was always locked up. Perhaps it was just one of the many issues between Sal and Mary Klein. As Jason sat on the edge of the bed, stretching his bad knee, he suddenly heard another strange sound. Unless his ears were playing tricks on him, it sounded like the back door was being opened too slowly. A shiver ran down his spine. Deciding to be cautious, he swiftly headed to the closet, where he kept his old Winchester hidden over the door. Jason learned from his father, who was a cop in the 70s, what he was taught at the police academy. One piece of advice was to rack around in the chamber when entering a building late at night. It's a sound meant to scare off any potential bad guys. Jason's dad may have old-fashioned methods, but given the current situation, it seemed like sound advice. Although Jason couldn't recall being this frightened before, he did his best to calm his nerves. He went to the bedroom door, loaded the first of the 3 double-aught buckshells into the chamber, and then shouted down the stairs with a hint of false bravery, "Hey, come on up! Got a little surprise for you!" The next thing Jason heard was the screen door slamming. He hurried to the back bedroom and peered out the window. Just then, he saw someone climbing over the backyard fence. It was a clear night, 2 nights before the full moon, so even though Jason couldn't see any features, it was clear that it was a man trying to hop the fence. However, he dropped something. Was it a magnum? It certainly looked like it that the man quickly stashed back in his pocket before hopping over the fence. Now, the neighbor's dog was barking like crazy, and the Klein's back porch light flicked on. Unfortunately, the light didn't provide enough illumination to identify the person running down the alley. Jason returned to his bedroom and picked up the phone. "What's your emergency?" "Somebody just broke into my house, but they've left and are running away." "Are you safe?" "Yeah, I think so, but the person's getting away. Maybe you can catch them." The conversation between Jason and the dispatcher quickly turned tense, with Jason urging the police to hurry and catch the intruder, while the dispatcher explained that it might take some time as Jason was no longer in immediate danger and there were other emergencies to attend to. Jason realized he went too far when he sarcastically asked if those emergencies included stopping for donuts and coffee before coming to his house. 2 miles away, Sandy Mason sat in his car, trying to catch his breath. How did everything mess up so bad? He spent the whole week getting ready for last night, checking out the area, planning where to park without drawing attention, figuring out the best way to get to and from the Tyler house. He knew all about that annoying dog next door. That's why he walked through the alley at 2 a.m. for 3 nights just to make the barking seem normal. But now, the lack of sleep was messing with his head and his work performance. Darn it. Planning and pulling off the perfect ending wasn't easy. This was Sandy's best shot at getting rid of Jason Tyler. Sandy wondered how disappointed Alexis would be when she got back from her business trip and found out she's still married to that a-hole. Alexis wouldn't show it, though. She's too good at putting on a show. For the past 6 months, ever since he joined Alexis's department, Sandy felt like Alexis wasn't interested in him, but he saw the signs. The way she smiled when she walked by his desk, Sandy knew part of that smile was just for him. And now all the work they put in for last night went down the drain. Sandy had other ways to deal with Jason, but they'd take too long, and he was tired of waiting to be with Alexis. Sandy rubbed his face as he sat in the car, thinking back to the first time he saw Alexis. It was in a meeting, and Alexis sat right next to him. Her skirt hiked up a bit as she sat down, showing a glimpse of her thigh before she pulled it back down. She smiled straight at him, reached out her hand, and said, "Hi, I'm Alexis Tyler." Just like that. Then, last month, he spotted her in the break room having lunch with Susan Oster. He asked if he could join them, and Alexis, with her sweet voice and smile, welcomed him. While Alexis chatted with Susan, Sandy sensed her words were directed at him. Alexis laughed as she told Susan, "Sometimes, Susan, I envy your single life. I've been trying to train Jason for 20 years, And this morning I almost fell into the toilet because he left the seat up again. My fault for not turning on the light. Susan shared her own dating mishaps, and they both laughed. But Sandy understood Alexis's subtle message. She wanted to be rid of Jason. Sandy remembered the morning she left her house key on her desk. It seemed like an invitation for him to duplicate it. She was waiting for his report on the Graves audit, but when he dropped it off at her cubicle, there were her keys just sitting there. He took them, made an excuse to the receptionist, and hurried to the hardware store to make a copy. It wasn't hard to spot the house key on her keychain. Getting the duplicate took less than half an hour, but when he returned to the office, Alexis was already back from her meeting. He couldn't just leave the keys at her desk. That would look suspicious. After brainstorming, he decided to toss the keys under Alexis's Honda near the driver's side door in the parking garage. Problem solved. Back in the present, as he continued to fantasize, Sandy's arousal faded. Just before he climaxed, headlights reflecting off his rearview mirror startled him. He slouched down as a police cruiser passed by. It took another 10 minutes for his heart rate to settle before he drove home to his apartment. 2 officers arrived at the Tyler home an hour after the 911 call to investigate and file a report. Officers Jones and Shepard were polite but distant, showing little sympathy for Jason's situation. As they inspected the property with flashlights, they noticed that the back door hadn't been tampered with. Jason was sure he had checked all the doors before bed, but the police seemed skeptical. After completing their report, they left through the front door. Jason overheard Officer Jones joking about grabbing a donut and coffee, prompting laughter from Officer Shepard, likely waking any still sleeping neighbors. Too wired to sleep, Jason brewed a pot of coffee and spent the next 3 hours sorting paperwork. At 7 a.m., he called his wife to say good morning, but decided not to worry her about the break-in until she returned home that evening. Her flight was due at 6:30, and she had driven herself to the airport. By 8 a.m., he informed his boss he wouldn't be coming into work and explained why. He then called a locksmith to change the locks and install a couple of door alarms. He and Alexis would discuss whether to install a home security system later. The locksmith finished before 1 p.m., leaving Jason with nothing else to do but head to the office for the rest of the day. Kevin Smith, Jason's boss, had already informed the office about the break-in, so Jason spent the first hour fielding questions from concerned coworkers. Eventually, things settled down, allowing him to focus and get some work done. Alexis stood at the door, frustrated to find her key useless. This day was going downhill fast, all thanks to Sandy Mason's incompetence. His shoddy audit report meant her trip to Portland was a waste. She planned to report his errors to the department manager on Friday. She was stuck in Portland because Mason didn't double-check his figures before she left. Luckily, Donald Graves had all the documentation to prove the Portland office's compliance with financial policies. Alexis felt relieved that Donald didn't react badly to her visit and that she caught an earlier shuttle home. As a problem solver, Alexis tried the back door, but her key didn't work there either, causing a moment of panic. Just weeks ago, she and Jason watched Unfaithful, where a similar situation led to drastic consequences. Jason had joked about changing the locks if she ever cheated, and now she was facing the first part of his jest, though she hadn't done anything wrong. Calling Jason, Alexis barely managed to get through before getting cut off. "Jason, what's going on? My key won't work in the locks at home." Jason was caught off guard and blurted out the first thing that came to mind, not the smartest move given the situation. "Alexis, I thought your flight was at 6:30. "What does that have to do with me not being able to get in the house? Why are the locks changed?" "I'll be home in 20 minutes. I'm really sorry. I'll explain everything when I get there. Just hold on, love." "Hurry up. I really need to pee and my bladder is not happy." Jason kept apologizing as he grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, but Alexis had already hung up. Breaking a few traffic laws, Jason made it home in the promised 20 minutes. He opened the front door just as Alexis got out of her car. Despite her angry look, she still kissed him before heading inside. Jason retrieved her suitcase and briefcase from the car. Inside, he had one of Alexis's favorite ales poured and ready for her. Seeing her husband with a sheepish smile and the peace offering, Alexis smiled back. She hugged him and gave him a kiss. "Now spill it. What's going on with the locks?" Jason recounted the break-in to Alexis, detailing everything that had occurred since then. Alexis was stunned by how close she had come to losing her beloved. Tears streamed down her face at the mere thought of life without him. She apologized for her earlier anger on the phone. As for installing a security system, Alexis didn't hesitate. We're definitely getting a security system. Katie is coming home from school next weekend, and I won't risk her safety. When Alexis parked in the underground garage on Friday morning, she made sure to follow her new routine. Before stepping out, she secured her keyring in the side pocket of her purse. Ever since she lost her keys last month, she made sure they were safe. It took her over an hour to find them last time, with Susan's help retracing her steps. She had thought she left them on her desk, but the rush to her morning meeting made her misplace them. She even searched under her desk and in the trash can before Susan found them under the car. Alexis used the button on the door to lock her car, a safety measure Jason had taught her after reading about thieves intercepting key fob signals in parking lots. An internet article mentioned a similar incident where a woman was offended in her car. The theory was that the attacker hid in the back seat and surprised her. Alexis used to think this was paranoid, but after the attempted break-in, she saw the value in being cautious. As Alexis walked past Sandy Mason's cubicle, she felt his eyes on her. It sent a chill down her spine. There was something about him that gave her the creeps. Sandy had joined the department about 6 months ago. During a staff meeting, he was already seated, staring at her as she entered the room. With no other option, she took the only available seat next to him. He even had the audacity to try and peek up her skirt, but she quickly adjusted it. However, his gaze then shifted to her chest. Instead of calling him out, she introduced herself with a firm handshake and a smirk. A few weeks ago, Sandy rudely interrupted a conversation Alexis was having with Susan in the break room. Despite feeling uncomfortable, they didn't have the heart to tell him to leave. They reluctantly allowed him to join them, but soon realized he was eavesdropping on their conversation. They exchanged a nervous glance when they caught him grinning at Alexis's remarks. Feeling fed up, Alexis scheduled a meeting with her manager, Hank Dolan, that afternoon. She planned to address Sandy Mason's incompetence and potential harassment. Hopefully, this would lead to Sandy being reassigned or even fired. Friday night, Sandy was sitting in front of his large-screen TV watching movies of Alexis Tyler that Sandy made with his smartphone. The technology today was just amazing. Back in high school, he got caught by a teacher when he was following one of the cheerleaders up the stairs with his camera. If they didn't want him to film up their skirts, why did they wear them so short? The vice principal audaciously accused him of filming in a public area, suggesting it was a setup by the cheerleader to be recorded. Sandy couldn't make sense of it. Despite receiving a 3-day suspension, he got expelled when his website with other videos and photos surfaced. It took only a short while for authorities to figure out how he got footage from the girls' locker room. Sandy was 15 when he was arrested. His parents hired a great attorney who fought hard to prevent Sandy from having to register as an offender. Sandy got off with a 3-year suspended sentence, and his arrest record was expunged when he turned 19. Most of the images were taken at the office. Alexis in the conference room at her cubicle, a couple as she stood in line across the street at the Starbucks. But one of his favorites was coming up, a 30-second short of Alexis running down the park path in her jogging outfit. If only he had a way to blur out her husband from the movie. Sandy decided to spend Saturday looking for an editing program to remove Jason Tyler's image from this movie. Of course, the program would be unnecessary as soon as Jason Tyler was not alive. Then he will be able to take all the movies he wants of Alexis when they're together. The frustration Sandy experiences in the next part of the movie almost spoils his enjoyment. While lost in thought, he forgets to move the drone away from the Tyler yard. Suddenly, Jason Tyler emerges from the house with a magnum, aiming at the drone. Sandy reacts quickly, maneuvering the controls just in time to avoid being shot. Although tempted to report Jason for breaking FAA rules, which prohibit shooting at a drone even if it's taking pictures of your property, Sandy hesitates. He's unsure if reporting Jason would lead back to him. After the movie finishes, Sandy cleans up and reflects on the afternoon. What an incredible woman! Sandy realizes too late how poorly his Graves audit report turned out. His mind was elsewhere most of the time he reviewed the Portland office books. It's clear that Mr. Dolan let Sandy off with just a warning because of Alexis's efforts to protect him. She must have flown to Portland herself to smooth things over with Graves and prevent Sandy from getting in trouble with their manager. Come Monday morning, he'll focus on his work to avoid more trouble. Losing his job would mean losing precious time with Alexis. Before Monday, he'll plan his next move in dealing with Jason Tyler. Saturday morning, Alexis and Jason were gearing up for a run. Alexis needed to blow off some steam. She was fuming at her weak boss. Jason listened attentively as Alexis let it all out. I can't believe Hank just gave that jerk a warning. My whole week was wasted because of Mason's screw-ups. And when I told Hank about the harassment, he told me to take it up with HR. Knowing when to stay quiet, Jason understood the challenges women face in the workplace, especially someone as attractive as Alexis. Jason felt lucky to be married to her. She was faithful and stunning. Alexis bounced back to her pre-pregnancy shape 6 months after Katie's birth. Within a year, you couldn't even tell she'd had a baby. Jason reminisced about their vacation in the Bahamas, their first trip alone after Katie was born. Leaving Katie with his parents, they flew to Miami and then sailed to Nassau. 6 days of bliss in paradise. Alexis stunned Jason by revealing her new belly button piercing. That trip marked the first time he saw Alexis sunbathe topless, a sight he'd never forget. After Jason finished stretching and they were ready to run, Alexis began to relax. They headed towards the park, about half a mile away, which had a scenic trail leading to the waterfront. At the park's north end, there was a hill with a staircase carved into it, 290 steps to the top. On good days, they could run the whole way without stopping. On their way back, Jason and Alexis decided to walk the last mile. The stress of the week had drained their energy. Jason noticed a guy sitting on a bench, seemingly talking on his phone, but the angle seemed odd, reminding Jason of past encounters with creeps filming topless women at beaches. As they passed the man, Jason brought it up to Alexis, who was caught up discussing Katie's upcoming visit and didn't notice. When Alexis turned back to look, she recognized the man. "Oh my God, that's Sandy Mason!" "What? The guy you said was offending you? Why is he filming us? I knew there was something off about him. Should I go back and confront him?" "And do what? He's in a public park, and we can't prove he's filming us unless we grab his phone. I'll add this to my report to HR on Monday." "Alexis, I want you to be more careful and stay alert. I don't trust this guy. Start carrying that mace spray, I got you. No arguments, just do it." Although uncomfortable with the idea, Alexis knew Jason was right. She felt even more uneasy now than before. Jason didn't mention it to Alexis, but he recognized the man on the park bench from a previous encounter. He knew the police couldn't do much about someone simply using a phone on a bench, but Jason had other options. Once home, he immediately contacted the investigation firm his brokerage used and asked the owner to return his call urgently, or at the latest by Monday morning. Alexis spoke with Clyde Walker from HR on Monday about her worries, including the incident of Sandy Mason filming in the park on Saturday. Clyde informed her that they couldn't act on this directly, but he would warn Sandy on Tuesday about giving unwanted attention to female staff, which might be seen as harassment. "Are you going to tell him I complained?" "No, Alexis, I'll keep it confidential. That's allowed for a warning. If the situation worsens, we might have to disclose the signed complaint. If he hires a lawyer, the lawyer will definitely want to see it. Hopefully, a warning is enough to change his behavior. I'll make sure to follow up." Alexis left the meeting feeling hopeful that Sandy's behavior would change, avoiding any further issues. Raised by her deeply compassionate mother, Alexis was always encouraged to look for the good in people. Her mother believed there must always be a reason behind someone's misdeeds, unable to accept that some people might simply have malicious intent. Alexis always aimed to live by her mother's wisdom. In high school, she held the titles of cheer squad captain and homecoming queen, striving to embody grace. However, individuals like Sandy Mason tested her patience and principles. Since their first encounter 6 months ago, Alexis felt uneasy whenever she crossed paths with him in the department. Dave Phillips, the owner of Phillips Investigations, met with Jason at 11 a.m. Jason's message over the weekend prompted Dave to arrange this Monday morning meeting promptly, recognizing the urgency of the matter. "Dave, I need you to dig up everything on this Mason guy. Where's he from? What's his background? Is he a threat?" Alexis mentioned he joined her department 6 months ago and keeps his personal life under wraps. She avoids him, but others have tried to engage him without success. Dave took notes as Jason briefed him. Looking up, he replied, "I'll contact our attorney right away and have them reach out to Alexis's HR department. Given her formal complaint and Saturday's incident, they'll need to provide information on Mason. Our attorney won't take no for an answer. Otherwise, we'll consider legal action. We'll delve deeper into Mason's background, as I'm not sure how thoroughly the company vetted him." "Thanks, Dave. You understand how crucial this is for me. With the recent break-in at our house and now this, I'm on edge and in need of answers. Consider it done. We'll start working on it today. I've got some time this week and I'll assign Dwayne Larson, one of our top people, to handle this. We'll get you the information you need." "What about involving the police?" "We'll loop them in if and when we have something concrete. Right now, all we've got is a coworker acting oddly and being seen in a public park a couple of times. If we contact Mason now with what we've got, he might go into hiding and be more cautious. You know, it just occurred to me. A few weeks back, a drone flew over our property and hovered over Alexis while she was sunbathing. Any chance Mason owns a drone? I'll check into it. Some of the larger drones are registered with the FAA. We'll look into that. If you think of anything else, any small details that didn't seem significant before, give me a call on my cell. Every bit of information helps if we end up involving the police. Also, would you feel more comfortable if we hired a bodyguard for Alexis? Let's hold off on that for now. What's puzzling is, if Mason was behind the break-in at our house, why do it when Alexis was away? He must have known she was in Portland. Yeah, you're right, that doesn't add up. But in this line of work, I've learned that most of these people act irrationally. Maybe the break-in and the stalking are unrelated. We'll keep them connected for now until we find out more. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you getting on this so quickly and your personal attention to our concerns. What else would you expect? You're not just a client. You and Alexis have been friends for years. With that, Jason and Dave stood up, shook hands, and Jason left Dave's office, heading down the street to his own office. Jason found himself more observant of his surroundings, even checking reflections in shop windows as he passed by. Dave watched his friend leave and immediately picked up the phone. Alice, could you please ask Dwayne to come see me? Thanks. Sandy Mason grew increasingly frustrated and angry. On Tuesday morning, he got called into the HR department and was informed about a serious complaint of potential offending from a woman in his department. He knew it had to be Susan Oster, who was envious of his relationship with Alexis. He vowed to make her pay for it. However, Sandy's more pressing concern was how to deal with Jason Tyler. It had been almost a week since his failed attempt to break into the Tyler house, and he still hadn't come up with a better plan. Going back inside was too risky, especially since he noticed a new ADT sign there. No matter how he considered it, all his ideas for eliminating Jason had risks of getting caught. What good was it to get rid of Jason if he ended up in jail and unable to marry Alexis? The thought of jail terrified Sandy, reminding him of how close he came to trouble in high school. Then a new idea struck him. Rather than ending Jason, he could frame him for a serious crime that would lead to a long prison sentence. But the crime would have to be so heinous that Alexis would leave him. What crime could achieve that? As Sandy pondered his dilemma at his cubicle, he saw Alexis's reflection in his monitor. Suddenly, the solution dawned on him. If he orchestrated the ending of the Tyler's daughter and framed Jason for it, it would guarantee Alexis divorcing him. Plus, he wouldn't have to deal with Jason's child. Smirking to himself, Sandy thought, "This needs more thought." With this new plan in mind, Sandy decided it was time to retaliate against Susan. Under an alias, he logged onto the online dating service Susan had mentioned. Within 30 minutes, he found her profile, and Mr. Sam Martin sent a request to meet Miss Susan Oster soon. Satisfied with his scheme, Sandy leaned back in his chair with a smug grin and finally focused on his work again. Susan spent the first half of the week auditing the Eugene office. It wasn't until Thursday afternoon that she and Alexis had a chance to catch up. Alexis shared the incidents from the park on Saturday and the HR meeting on Monday morning. Susan couldn't help but notice Alexis scanning the cafe before starting to talk. She was shocked by the park incident, but not surprised by HR's lack of action. Most HR guys were spineless. Alexis realized she was dominating the conversation and asked Susan about her date last weekend. Another online date, another letdown. He was nice, but by the end of the evening, we both knew it wasn't going anywhere. Hearing Susan's story saddened Alexis. Susan's first marriage ended after catching her husband cheating twice. They tried counseling, but he got caught with his secretary again. She blew the whistle, hoping to win him over. Good luck, sweetheart. Anyway, since Tuesday evening, I've been talking to a seemingly decent guy. We're planning to meet soon. He's finishing a project at work first, so maybe within the next week or so. Alexis tried to sound positive. That's great. One day the right guy will make you happy. You deserve it. Alexis silently thanked her lucky stars she wasn't in Susan's shoes. Despite the tension, the week passed relatively calmly at the Tyler residence. With Dave Phillips's connections, the security system was installed and operational. Katie would be returning home on Friday after finishing her last final for the summer quarter on Thursday. Both Alexis and Jason were excited about the 3 weeks they would have with Katie before she went back to school for the fall quarter. They had both taken the next 2 weeks off work to spend time with Katie at their cabin on Lake Wenatchee in eastern Washington, planning for 2 weeks of hiking and fishing. During the second week, Katie's boyfriend would be visiting. While Alexis hoped their relationship wasn't too serious given Katie's young age of 20, Jason looked forward to having a chat with him. Jason could be protective when it came to Katie, but Katie understood their concerns stemmed from love and accepted it with good humor. On Friday, Jason stopped by Dave Phillips's office on his way home. Dwayne briefed Jason on what he had found so far. Sandy is actually Sanders Austin Mason, 28, born in Vancouver, Washington. His previous job was with Exxon in Houston. We tried to dig into why he left Exxon, but it's like trying to crack the Pentagon. As an adult, he doesn't have any arrest records or convictions in Texas or elsewhere. Here's where it gets tricky. We suspect Mason has a juvenile record. He attended the public high school in Vancouver for his freshman and sophomore years, but he's not listed as a student in the yearbook for the following year. We checked local private schools too, but found no record of him attending. Although his parents stayed in the same house during that time, he wasn't enrolled in any nearby school. We used the yearbook and a local phone directory to track down a couple of his former classmates. While no one claimed to be his friend, 2 classmates recalled rumors about Sandy Mason taking upskirt photos. There was even an unverified rumor about a hole in the girl's locker room. He seems to vanish until he's 19 and in college. If he had a juvenile record, a good attorney would likely have it erased unless it involved a conviction as an offender. Since we didn't find any of those, it's reasonable to assume he wasn't involved in any offense. Jason released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding throughout Dave's explanation. Well, I suppose that's somewhat reassuring, but what's our next move? We'll address that shortly. But there are 2 more things you need to know. First, Mason does own a drone, a high-end one equipped with a quality camera. A neighbor from a building across the street has seen him on the roof with it. Once it takes off, he disappears, likely back to his apartment where he controls it and watches through the camera. He only returns to the roof when the drone lands. Is that legal? Yes, the legality of drones is currently a gray area. Neither our state legislature nor the feds have kept pace with the rapid advancement of drone technology. The feds, as usual, were caught unprepared. All right, you mentioned 2 things. What's the other? The second piece of information is more concerning. Mason has a 9mm Glock. Are you familiar with Magnum? I know enough to recognize it. I couldn't identify what I saw the night of the break-in. It was too dark and far away. Does Mason have a permit for it? No, but most criminals don't bother with getting a concealed carry permit. Have you thought about carrying? That's not going to happen. Alexis is afraid of Magnums. I'm fortunate she allows mine in the house. Well, I wouldn't recommend anyone carrying if they're not comfortable with firearms. Too many things can go wrong if you're not trained and prepared. I know you bought Alexis a handheld mace canister. You might want to consider getting one for yourself and your daughter. Now, regarding your earlier question, it might be costly, but I propose hiring a law firm in Texas to access Exxon's records. It could run us a few thousand or more if Exxon decides to resist. But with the right legal team, we can obtain a judge's order for Exxon to release their personnel files on Mason. If we secure a judge's order, it can shield us from any potential countersuit from Mason. What do you think? Jason didn't hesitate. Let's do it. Dave, Dwayne, and Jason spent another 30 minutes discussing the investigation's specifics. Once again, Dave brought up the option of hiring a bodyguard. Since Dwayne would be in Texas, he wasn't available, but Dave had other alternatives. Although Jason still felt it was unnecessary, he stopped at the outdoor store on his way home and purchased 2 canisters of pepper spray. When Jason got home that evening, he couldn't help but smile seeing Katie's car in the driveway. Having her home for 3 weeks would be wonderful. As he walked in, Katie greeted him with a big hug, but he noticed the serious look on her face. When were you going to tell me about the break-in? Katie's eyes were moist as she spoke, not waiting for his response. If anything happened to you or Mom, I don't know how I'd cope. Promise me you'll keep yourself safe. Promise. Jason knew Katie was being overly emotional. He glanced over her shoulder and saw Alexis standing nearby, also teary-eyed. His first thought was how he'd handle the next few weeks with both women so emotional. Then he felt grateful to have 2 caring women in his life. Could life get any better? He hugged his daughter again, promising to do everything to keep the family safe. The evening buzzed with conversation. Alexis barely had time to eat as she recounted the past semester, especially gushing about the amazing young man she was dating, Charles Owen. He was a senior majoring in engineering in ROTC, and soon joining the Army as a 2nd lieutenant. As Jason listened, he braced himself for the young man's visit, suspecting he might soon meet his future son-in-law. Katie asked about the break-in. This was the moment Jason had been dreading since meeting with the detectives. He didn't want to frighten Alexis or Katie, but he also didn't want them to underestimate the danger. Jason shared the details of the break-in, including how he confronted the intruder with the Magnum. Katie glanced at her mom, knowing her feelings about firearms, but couldn't help but laugh at Jason's shouting down the stairs. "Come on up, got a little surprise for you." "Dad, that's hilarious. Is that something from one of your Bruce Willis movies?" "I don't know, hon. Just felt right at the time. Anyway, it worked. 2 seconds later, I heard the screen door slam. Thank goodness. I've never shot anything in my life." Who knows how I would have reacted if it came to that? With Jason's last remark, the dining room fell silent for a moment. Alexis broke the tension, telling Jason and Katie to clear their plates while she loaded the dishwasher. They could have someone on one time. Both Katie and Jason thought it was a great idea. They each had something to say without worrying Alexis. "Katie, let's take a walk around the block." As they strolled, Jason spoke first. "Listen, I didn't want to worry your mother too much, but this Mason guy might be more dangerous than I let on. One of the detectives is checking out Mason's old home and workplace next week. Hopefully we'll learn more about this creep before your mom goes back to work in 2 weeks. I've convinced your mom to carry mace when she's alone in the parking garage. I got one for you too. I hope you'll consider carrying it, just in case." Now it was Katie's turn to share something she hadn't planned to tell her mother. "Dad, I hope you won't think badly of Charles, but he's taught me how to use a Magnum. I have a concealed carry permit and a 9mm semi-auto. I go to the range with Charles, and I'm pretty good. You can keep the mace. I'll keep my Smith & Wesson." Jason was taken aback for a moment, but managed to respond, "So, where is it now? I can't imagine what your mom would say if she knew there was a tool in the house or the cabin." "It's in my bedroom with a trigger lock for safety when I'm not around. The key's in my pocket." "Well, I don't like keeping secrets from your mom, but let me figure out how to talk to her about having it in the house. Let's keep this between us for now." The more Sandy thought about ending Katie Tyler, the more reasons he found not to do it. First, framing Jason would have to be foolproof, which was tough. Plus, if Tyler stayed alive, neither he nor Alexis would get Jason's life insurance, and Jason might spend a fortune on lawyers for the trial. All their assets would be gone, and Sandy was counting on that money to start a new life. Sandy didn't like to work much, so having enough money meant he could relax and enjoy life. No, ending Katie and framing Jason wasn't going to happen. Back to plan A, off Jason. Keep it simple, approach him on the street one night, make it look like a mugging gone wrong, and take him out. There was no connection between Sandy and Jason, so why would the police suspect him? Sandy was being overly clever. Just to make sure the police saw the murder as a robbery, he went out Saturday night and tagged 2 buildings with gang graffiti. He felt satisfied as he watched the local news on Sunday. A reporter was talking about the rise in gang activity, and Sandy smirked, thankful for slow news days. It was Tuesday evening of the next week when Susan Oster left the lounge feeling a bit tipsy. Susan didn't think she was too drunk to drive home. It had been a rough day, and the evening was a disappointment. Her date from the online site, Sam Martin, was a no-show at the lounge for their first meeting. Susan was too upset to eat, and the 2 Cosmos hit her hard. Confused, she unlocked her car, and then felt a sweet-smelling rag over her face. As she slumped down, 2 arms caught her and tossed her into the back seat before she blacked out. When Susan woke up, she saw Sandy Mason staring at her from between the 2 front seats of her car. She tried to move, but her arms and legs were tied up, and the shoulder strap restricted her movement. Her eyes adjusted to the dark, focusing on the tool Mason held, pointed at her. "Sandy, what are you doing? Let me go!" Susan strained to speak, realizing the seriousness of her situation. "Susan, why did you complain about me at work?" Mason's voice was tense. "I didn't. I never complained about you. Why are you saying that?" Susan's confusion grew. "Don't lie to me, witch. I know it was you who told HR I was offending you." "I didn't. It was Alexis who complained when you wouldn't stop stalking her," Susan blurted out, realizing her mistake. "You're lying. Alexis loves me. We're getting married once Jason's out of the picture." "Alexis loves you? What? I didn't know that." Susan was baffled. "Please, just let me go. I promise not to tell anyone about this. I didn't report you to HR," Susan pleaded. Confused, Mason stepped out of the car into the deserted parking lot to collect his thoughts. 10 minutes later, he returned, and the dome light went out, enveloping them in darkness again. "Okay, I'll release you, but you gotta answer my questions and keep your word about not spilling tonight's secrets. Understand?" Sandy laid out the terms. Susan just nodded, scared, and hoping maybe talking would save her life. She was desperate. Originally, Sandy wanted Susan to suffer, but now he felt pity. She was just caught up in this mess. Still, she had to go, but he decided to knock her out before ending it. With the info he needed, Sandy got out, grabbed chloroform, and soaked a rag. Susan recognized the smell and begged him not to. He ignored her pleas, waiting until she went limp. "Sorry, Susan." He bagged the rag, tightened it around her neck with tape, then waited outside for 10 minutes. Sandy hoisted Susan's body, carried her up the trail to a cliff, hoping wildlife would delay any evidence. Then he planned to flee the country, leaving behind a trail of revenge against Alexis and her family. Sandy smirked at the thought as he drove Susan's car to the address she gave him. A cabin? Even better than his original plan. Dwayne Larson had to wait until Tuesday to get to Houston due to a court appearance. The first law firm in Houston, recommended by the Seattle attorneys, declined the case due to a conflict. Dwayne felt disappointed, thinking the Seattle lawyers might have known this before he flew down. Luckily, another Houston firm referred him to Schuler and Simmons, where George Schuler agreed to help with meetings at Exxon. 2 hours later, Dwayne sat across from Grimley's assistant, Elaine Stewart, at a quiet table. "I know your lawyer is working on getting a subpoena, but there are important things about Sandy Mason that aren't in the file. Aren't you worried about getting in trouble for meeting with me?" "No, Mr. Grimley actually wanted me to meet with you. He's a good guy. He's limited legally, but he'll do whatever he can to help you protect that woman up north." When we let go of Mason, Mr. Grimley was concerned we were just delaying the problem. When the Seattle firm called for a reference, he tried to warn them without breaking any rules, but it seems they didn't catch on. What's in the file are records of 2 warnings Mason got for harassing women in his department. One woman even complained he was touching himself inappropriately during a meeting. Grimley was about to fire Mason when he suddenly quit with barely any notice. A week later, we got a call from the Houston police, following up on a request from Mexican authorities. They were investigating a woman's death in the desert and wanted to talk to Mason. He left Texas abruptly. Grimley contacted the police when he got the call from Seattle, but we haven't heard from them since until your office called us last week. Do you know what happened with the woman's death and the Mexican police inquiry? Well, that's the concerning part. Grimley asked me unofficially to check because my brother-in-law is a cop, and here's what I found. The woman was from Mexico, but had a work visa in Texas. It seems she met Sandy Mason on a dating site, and her friends believed they dated briefly before she ended it. They were puzzled why she was found in Mexico since she rarely crossed the border except to visit family on Sundays and always returned before dark. The Mexican police wanted to speak to Mason because records showed he entered the country shortly before the woman's body was found by a farmer. Her entry into Mexico wasn't recorded. While there wasn't enough proof to bring Mason back, they asked Houston PD to question him. They did so once, just before Mason quit. When they tried again, he'd disappeared. We shared what we knew, but that's the last we heard. Given the situation with drug gangs in Mexico, it wasn't a top priority for them, but my brother-in-law mentioned there's a warrant if Mason goes back. Dwayne and Miss Stewart finished lunch. She provided some more details, then they went their separate ways. Dwayne called his boss in Seattle, who then tried to reach Jason, but got his voicemail. On Thursday, Sandy drove past the Tyler cabin, pondering life's unfairness and when luck would be on his side. Noticing one of the cars missing from last night, he figured either Alexis or the Tyler girl wasn't home. Although he wished to act the previous night, the motion lights turning on as he approached the cabin changed his plans. Jason Tyler was mowing the lawn as Sandy passed by. Using Google Earth, Sandy had an idea of nearby cabins, and seeing no neighbors around confirmed they posed no threat. Parking at the state park, he grabbed his mountain bike to blend in better and attract less attention. As he parked, Sandy reflected on how it became easier. The first time, he felt sick afterward, but with each subsequent victim, it troubled him less. The Mexican woman, in particular, angered him for ending their date abruptly. He disposed of her body in Mexico and left town after a visit from the Houston police. Now, as he approached the Tyler cabin, any hesitation from previous endings was absent. "I'm going to enjoy this," he thought. Jason thought he heard a scream over the mower's noise. Pausing, he glimpsed 2 figures through the cabin window. Reacting quickly, he shut off the mower, dashed across the lawn, and rushed inside. Katie arrived at the cabin's driveway and sensed something was off. Seeing the mower left out, a rarity, raised her suspicions, fueled by her mother's stalker warnings. Wondering how the stalker could find them, she hesitated, noticing her parents' absence at the door, a break from their usual greeting routine. Despite considering a mundane explanation, like her parents' private time, she couldn't shake the feeling and discreetly armed herself with a pistol Charles had taught her to handle safely. With caution, she entered the cabin. Inside, she discovered a grim reality. Her parents held at magnum point by a menacing stranger. "Come on," I said, "join the party. Your mother's been leading me on, making me think she liked me, but she was just laughing at me with Susan Oster. Susan isn't laughing anymore, and soon neither will your mother. Come on in." Katie stood still, trying to think. She remembered Charles's teachings. She had a clear shot at Mason, but she knew she couldn't shoot fast enough to save her mother. Charles taught her it wasn't like the movies. In real life, the hostage gets shot first. Mason misinterpreted Katie's hesitation. "Scared, huh? Frozen in fear? This will be even more fun than I thought. I was going to let your mom watch me off you and your dad, then have some fun with her before ending it. But now that I see how cute you are, I might play with you first." "Your dad isn't so brave without his tool," Mason taunted. "Got a little something for you here." He laughed sinisterly, turning back to Katie. "And just because I can, I'll let your mom and dad watch. Bullets in their knees to keep them alive, but unable to move." Mason chuckled as he stood up from the stool and positioned himself near the sofa, aiming to shoot at the knees. He targeted Jason first, seeing him as the bigger threat, but from this angle, he couldn't keep an eye on Katie and her parents simultaneously. Katie saw her opportunity. Dropping the bag and lifting the tool, Katie caught Mason's attention briefly when the bag hit the floor. It was just enough distraction for her. In that moment, Katie's eyes lined up with her S&W 9mm Shield semi-auto. Mason's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. He tried to swing his Glock toward Katie, but he was too slow. Katie pulled the trigger, not dwelling on the gravity of taking a life, but focusing on what she'd practiced for months. She prayed later that ending him was the only way to save her family. The first bullet hit Mason squarely in the chest, but before he could register it, he heard the sound of a second shot. Remembering Charles's lessons, Katie fired 2 more times in quick succession. In less than 2 seconds, Mason collapsed to the floor, lifeless. Jason sprang into action, kicking the magnum away, though Mason was already off. It was a reflex action. Jason hadn't frozen in fear. Later, Jason questioned his bravery and masculinity, wondering if he should have confronted Mason earlier, before Katie came home. He replayed the scenario in his mind, wondering if he had anticipated Katie's arrival with her magnum. Did that delay his action? Would he have acted sooner to protect his daughters from harm? Deep down, he knew the truth. Just moments before Katie dropped the bag, Jason had been preparing to lunge at Mason in a desperate attempt to disarm him, despite knowing the slim odds of success. It seemed like fate intervened. The bag fell just before he made his move. For now, Jason was relieved to have his daughters safe. He embraced Alexis tightly, then reached out for Katie to join them. Katie made sure to clear the round from her pistol before joining the hug. Alexis noticed and realized what Katie had done. The shock was starting to fade. "Where did you get that tool?" Jason and Katie exchanged sheepish looks before Jason answered, "We'll talk about it later, honey. Just be grateful that our daughter knows how to use it. I can't wait to thank Charles for his role in saving our family." State troopers and county sheriffs began arriving within 30 minutes of the Tyler's 911 call. The situation seemed clear-cut. Katie had acted in self-defense. Another 30 minutes later, Mason's car was located, and its contents provided answers to many questions. Not only did it shed light on the events at the Tylers, but it also connected Mason to 2 unsolved murders in Florida and Mexico. It took 2 more days before Susan's body was discovered, and Mason had kept mementos from all 3 endings. Additionally, voyeuristic materials, including videos and photos of hundreds of unsuspecting women, were found on thumb drives locked inside a suitcase. The dates on these images spanned the past 12 years. In the following days, Jason sat on the back porch, enjoying a beer as he watched the moon rise over the lake. The sky was dark enough to reveal countless stars, and as Jason gazed upwards, a shooting star streaked past the Milky Way. He recalled the childhood tradition of making a wish upon a falling star, but felt no need, as his wish had already been granted. He silently expressed gratitude as he glanced back at the cabin, where his wife, daughter, and Charles sat at the table, illuminated only by candlelight. Charles had arrived earlier that day, and Jason found himself immediately fond of the young man. Charles was intelligent, respectful, and clearly smitten with Katie. Jason's protective demeanor softened throughout the evening, and Alexis observed his transformation with amusement, noting the stark contrast to Jason's approach with Katie's previous dates. Jason even accepted Charles's offer to teach him proper magnum handling at the local range. Although Alexis declined the same training for now, she conceded to allowing a tool in their home, albeit without readiness to use one herself. She mused that perhaps with time, her perspective might change, but for the moment she considered it a small victory to agree that outlawing magnums would only empower criminals. Sitting on the back porch, Jason finished his beer and felt grateful. Alexis appeared, carrying a couple more long-neck bottles, and handed one to Jason before joining him. Taking a swig from his bottle, Jason remarked, "This makes it 4 beers for me tonight. I'll probably have to get up at least once during the night because of it." Alexis responded, "If you come back to bed, don't hesitate to wake me up. When was the last time we stayed up late together?" Jason grinned, but before he could reply, the screen door opened again. Charles and Katie emerged, heading towards the lake. "We're going out in the rowboat and might go for a swim," they announced. Jason and Alexis chimed in simultaneously. "Be careful out there!" Amused, Alexis looked into Jason's eyes and said, "I like him, and I can see you do too. Having him here is good. It'll help distract Katie from what happened last week. Sandy Mason deserved to die, but it's unfortunate our daughter had to do it. She had a couple of rough nights last weekend. Just now, we were in the kitchen, and Katie was opening up about her feelings. Charles comforted her, letting her have a good cry. That young man shows a level of maturity beyond his years." "How did we get so fortunate, Jason? I can't stop thinking about Susan and how tragic her life was. She was such a kind woman, and her ending was so heartbreaking. It brings tears to my eyes," Alexis reflected. Knowing there was no simple answer, Jason wrapped his arm around Alexis, offering silent comfort to his wife.